Oh, there you are. Oh, it's a good thing I had this, otherwise I'd be a mere scorch mark in the wake of a lunar apocalypse. Welcome back to my ongoing series where I paint every version of Link from the Legend of Zelda games in my distinctive, slightly uncanny style. This time we're continuing with Majora's Mask. I'm assuming you've seen the previous episode, but if not, then you'd better get that bunny hood on pronto and skedaddle right over there. That's an order, soldier! Hoorah! The next part of our journey in Termina takes us from the southern swamp to the Snowhead Mountains in the north. After a long hike amidst a bitter snowstorm, we meet these happy little freaks. The Gorons! They love nothing more than a bit of rock and roll, and their favourite rock star is none other than a swell dude called Darmani. Oh god, he's dead. But that's alright, because upon playing the Song of Healing to his ghost, he realises that we can be the hero his people need instead, and as a reward he gives us the Goron Mask. This mask transforms Link into a big beefy Goron guy, with arms for days, eyes for days, legs... Okay, so he skipped leg day, but when you can roll around at the speed of sound like Sonic the goddamn Hedgehog, it doesn't really matter. I love this design, partly because someone said he looks like Jack Black and now I can't unsee it. As for the pose, I knew I wanted to emphasise his massive fists and his size while maintaining his connection to the ground. What I got was this vaulting, almost crawling pose with him winding up for a punch. It takes a lot of cues from characters like the Hulk or Beast from the X-Men, but it gives him a lot of personality, I feel. It makes him feel very heroic, which is fitting considering he's essentially role-playing as Darmani, the Goron hero. The Gorons originally appeared in Ocarina of Time, introduced as a bunch of lovable weirdos who just want to munch on rocks all day. Their design is essentially if a boulder had opinions on the weather and particular dietary requirements, so they're big and round and tough with these hard stone-like hides that let them curl into a ball if threatened. They also look really f***ing weird. I know my style can lean into the uncanny, but this time I claim no responsibility for what's about to happen. Gorons are just peculiar looking creatures. They've got huge bulging eyes and little slits for a nose, like a lizard, and these massive elongated arms and tiny legs like a gorilla. They're these weird, goofy distortion of hyper-masculinity, like if a gecko hit the gym and never left. And I love that about them. Too often in fantasy stories we see the same old species again and again, and what I love about Zelda is its ability to take well-worn fantasy tropes and make them interesting, make them unique in ways that feel authentic and creative. As such, Gorons act as a fun twist on your typical mountain-dwelling races, and culture-wise, they seem particularly inspired by Tolkien's dwarves with their vast mining operations and partiality for crushing weapons like hammers. Not to mention their formidable sturdiness and pride. However, despite their overwhelming strength and tough exteriors, Gorons are very jovial folks, the type you'd find around the pub on a Friday evening, but not the rowdy type, you get me, just a bunch of proper chill geezers, yeah, top blokes. Manchester United.
Come on, Ivo! Score some goal!
The actual painting process wasn't all that difficult. While rendering, I took cues once again from Yusuke Nakano's promotional artwork and leaned into the super harsh shadows, which really complement the defined shapes of his muscles. This style really lets me lean into my comic book roots a bit more, since drawing exaggerated superhero musculature was essentially how I got my start in properly learning anatomy. What I find interesting about the Goron's anatomy is that while they are certainly on the chunky side, they're never depicted as fat. Instead, they seem to take plenty of inspiration from champion weightlifters, especially with the huge core and the really defined arms. It's a body type that's not catering to aesthetics, but sheer power. One problem I faced was getting the texture of his skin right, whether I should lean more into a leathery texture or more smooth and shiny. In this case, it's mainly a matter of managing the highlights, how much white there needs to be to communicate the proper feel, but I think I got a good balance here. There's just enough to focus the eye, but not too much to distract. It's the same principle with the leather gauntlets and boots. Leather is always fun to render like this. You get to play with these harsh core shadows, but also these nice shiny highlights too. You have a lot of room to experiment whether you want to give it that polished finish or play around with fraying the seams to give it a rougher look. It's easy to give leather a history and a personality of its own. It's a very characterful material. The majority of the time-lapse is just editing to make sure everything comes together nicely. His skin tone, for example, I didn't want it to look too bright or too dark, too yellow or too orange. There's a very specific tonal sweet spot there, and I wanted to nail it down. The detailing on the gloves and boots was also a point of tedium, but it's worth it to make the design pop. You can see I added a rim light to the right side, just to give the edge of the character a bit more definition. It helps to make the piece more dynamic. A lot of previous paintings in the series had this flat lighting that gives them a more neutral mood, but this time I'm making much bolder choices. With Goron Link done, it's on to painting Snowhead Peak as the background. It's a really interesting dungeon, even if it's a ball ache to travel all the way back to the top when you inevitably fall down.
Oh yeah.
It's like the new yeesh.
Careful. Oh, Aaron. You just never set yourself up at the beginning. You're always wobbly.
I can't keep going. I can't keep going. I feel like saying you should getting frustrated about this is not fun to watch.
And with that, let's roll on the finished piece. So far, so good. I'm really happy with this one. Here's hoping Darmani is smiling down on us from the great rock quarry in the sky. But, as much as I'd like to sit here and admire it all day, we mustn't dawdle. Time is of the essence, people. After taking a brief detour south to Romani Ranch and helping little Romani fight off actual literal space aliens trying to abduct the cows... What the f***? We ride Epona out west and jump these barriers blocking our way to the Great Bay Coast. There we can enjoy the no doubt soothing ambience of some Nintendo beach music. I don't like it. There we rescue a poor Zora from the clutches of the sea. He reveals himself to be Macau, another rock star of the literal type this time. Summoning the last of his strength, Macau treats us to a rock ballad of the tragedy of a Zora named Lulu, whose eggs have been stolen away by pirates, before he then proceeds to... die. Right in front of us. And now you wear his face, and that lets you transform into a Zora. Okay, seriously, what the f*** is going on? Are you meaning to tell me that every time we transform using the masks, we inhabit the dead body of another person? But then what was the Deku mask? Because that was just given to us at the beginning of the game. It's not like we saw... Oh my god, are you serious? What? Huh? Huh? Why is this in a kid's game? What is this rated E for existential dread? And can you please turn off the music? It's really, I don't like... Right, I'm just gonna talk about the Zora now. Zora are essentially the elven race of the Zelda series, which is ironic because the Hylians are already kinda like elves with the ears and the magic and all that. But I digress. In the earlier games, the Zora were depicted more like your typical river monsters in Japanese folklore, but in Ocarina of Time, they were redesigned to be more in line with sea creatures, specifically dolphins with their smooth skin, cooler colours, big fins, and large expressive eyes. Their elegance in the water is equally reflected in their culture, with their fashion, their music, and their architecture all having these intricate motifs. They're a tall, refined, and beautiful species with these toned swimmer bodies, which makes sense considering how hydrodynamic they need to be to soar through the ocean. In the game, you have the ability to swim at incredible speeds, with these massive fins trailing behind you in this really dynamic way. As such, the pose I used for this piece is more evocative of flying than swimming. It lends to this idea of the Zora having an almost balletic quality to them while in their natural environment. The design for Zora Link isn't as transformative as some of the other masks, mostly resembling your average Zora, but the few unique quirks they add go a long way in distinguishing him from the rest. For one, you have this green skirt with a red belt, as well as the gauntlets and the boots, which do a lot to break up the silhouette, but perhaps my favourite choice was to have the fin on the back of the head slowly fade from blue to green to mimic Link's cap. Such a clever way of naturally integrating Link's main design elements seamlessly into this transformation. I'd already been leaning into these harsh shadows with the previous paintings, but for this one especially, I went for much darker tones, as if he's swimming in the depths of the ocean, By far, the biggest challenge for this piece was anatomical. Since the Zora are mostly humanoid in design, I had to really study up on the muscles of the torso. I of course used Olympic swimmers as my reference material, as well as some anatomy guides like my mini copy of Grey's Anatomy. But something I find a lot of anatomy books don't teach you is that muscles are rarely as defined as you might expect. Every person has the same muscle groups to some degree, but how visible they can be depends on various factors. For one, the way that skin lays on top of the muscles can have a huge effect, often obscuring them for the most part. It's only in very specific conditions that you can really see muscle definition to the degree of, say, a professional bodybuilder. I say all of this because knowing your anatomy and painting bodies are two separate schools of thought. It's always more aesthetically pleasing to depict anatomy in detail, to highlight and exaggerate it in aid of punctuating the forms that construct the body, but knowledge of anatomy alone doesn't make a body look realistic. It's more about recognizing the body as a collection of 3D objects and using that understanding to physically place it in a scene. That's what allows you to make it feel real. The way I eventually did this was by giving his skin a shiny, wet texture, letting the light catch on the planes of his sternum and obscure detail when required. Often painting the suggestion of a shape is more effective than depicting the shape itself, especially when dealing with really bright highlights such as this. My method for the shifting green sections of the painting was to lasso a green colour layer over the top and use an airbrush to erase a gradient into it. It's a bit of a scuffed method compared to what some people can do with masks, but it works on the fly, and it's easy to correct quickly. I find often that the simplest techniques work best for paintings like this. Rarely should your method take up more headspace than the result. I had to be very deliberate in my use of tonal values of the leather accessories because the majority of them are bathed in a really deep shadow, which makes the highlights even more important in depicting detail. One tip I often see is not to use absolute black or absolute white unless completely necessary. Ironically, using the extremes of the light spectrum can box you in and limit the intricacies of your painting. The more you restrict your palette, the more room you have to play with it in the latter stages, so keep it under control. Less is more. The eyes were tricky to get right. I looked to reference of deep sea creatures initially, specifically in the patterns of the iris and how, unlike mammals, there are no whites to a fish's eye. I struggled with that tidbit because every instinct I had was telling me to make his eyes more human, to make them more expressive, but in the end I chose to lean more towards my reference. I didn't want this to look like a man in a costume. I wanted Zora Link to look like a sea creature, more in line with the creature from the Black Lagoon or the amphibian man in the shape of water. Now the main figure is done. It's just painting the beach at the Great Bay Coast where you find Macau. Despite being a picturesque landscape, it's also very unsettling. There's not a lot to separate the beach from the ominous rocks surrounding it, and the lack of any landmarks on the horizon adds to this strange liminal feeling. To make the painting stand out, I brought the scene down into dusk with a pink overlay to contrast against Zora Link's green and blue. And with that, he's finished. It's time to play him out. This one I'm particularly fond of for a variety of reasons, but mostly I really like how the torso came together. It's really fun to flex that artistic muscle every now and then, and I think it does Macau a lot of justice. I guess you can say he's, sleeping with the fishes. With peace returned to the Great Bay, the only region that remains is Akana Valley, and luckily there isn't a version of Link introduced in that region. Nope. Not a single one.
That is f***ing horrifying.
With our 4 main objectives complete, there's nothing left to do except return to Clock Town and face Skull Kid once and for all for the fate of Termina. transported to the inside of the moon, where we find a group of children playing around a large tree in a grassy plain. You know, like the real moon. After vanquishing 4 of the children's challenges and trading in our dungeon boss masks, we finally come face to face with the horror tormenting Termina. The face of pure evil. Free from its prison in the mask, Majora hits us with the full might of its unearthly power. Deadly and terrifying, mischievous and merciless, Majora is nothing less than a terrible foe. But we will be worse. For collecting every mask in the game, solving the troubles of every person in Termina, we unlock this. This is the fierce Deity, based on the Buddhist concept of Krodha Vinantaka, a wrathful divine being whose sole purpose is to destroy all obstacles towards enlightenment. In this form, Link is more than a god. He becomes the arbiter of the natural balance of the universe itself, and as such, this might be the most powerful incarnation of Link we will ever see. The fierce Deity is probably the most badass character design I've ever seen in a video game. It's such an elegant twist on your typical Dark Link design, foregoing the black or silhouette motif and embracing a starker palette of grey and blue. There's an ethereal aura to him with hints of bright clashing colours perfectly in line with the rest of the game. The face markings, the blank lifeless eyes, the armour. We've never really seen a design like this in the series before or since. Perhaps the coolest part of the fierce Deity, however, is his weapon of choice. The massive double helix greatsword. The fact that he can even lift this thing, let alone wave it around as fast as he does, just shows you how strong this guy is. And it shoots laser beams, like, dude, what? It's like they told their designers, hey, make the coolest motherfucker who ever lived, and they did! It's no wonder that this character design has persisted in the community as long as it has. It's so distinct and memorable, it immediately makes an impression, and the fact that I get to paint it at all is just so brilliant! Starting off, I wanted to emphasise the use of his sword, with him standing tall and proud like a sentinel. I tried this initial pose with him holding the sword in front of his chest, however I found it just wasn't dynamic enough, it didn't show off enough of the design. So I tried again and came across the idea of him having the sword planted in front of his body as if to say, not one more step. The vibe I wanted to give from this painting was, be glad he's on your side. Now usually I'm not very gifted when it comes to drawing armour. I'm a lot more of a naturalistic artist. I adore the shapes of nature and being able to be more expressive in my strokes. But in this instance, I was happy to curb that instinct, because the way the plates form together in these patterns is so cool. The little details are what makes this design, so getting them right is so vital. And it means I get to flex my stuff with metal. You want to know why we artists enjoy drawing armor? Because we like to flex on you mortals by painting reflections. It's so satisfying to get it right, and it adds a lot of presence to a character to see them interact with light like this. Speaking of light, I chose this very central pointed light for this piece for a reason that I'll explain later. But I like how it makes him look like he appears out of the darkness, very thematically appropriate. The face was important to nail as well. I wanted this perfectly chiseled, incredibly beautiful face, but to the point where you lose some of the soul. Those blank eyes especially are meant to tell you that this is a being who isn't relatable. He's not a hero. He has a goal that aligns with ours, and we can rely on him to do it. But if you're looking for that basic human connection, it's not there. This isn't a Superman. This is a force of nature in a superhuman body. The gauntlets were quite difficult because it's multiple rings of details, and getting the foreshortening right was a bit of a headache, but they really help accentuate the forearms and the hands. As for the arms and legs, he's got these really dark tights that help pull the rest of the design down and let the armor and the tunic stand out more clearly. I like how it takes the typical Hylian tunic design and just puts the armor on top. It makes him feel more like a gladiator, which is fitting considering he's built for combat above all else. There's a real edge to this guy that feels earned. He's like fire. Powerful and certainly useful, but dangerous in equal measure. The beauty of this design are all the flourishes in contrast with the restraint. It doesn't go all out into an overcomplicated, overly designed mess. It adds just enough to give Link a new identity, but it doesn't break his design. This is probably because it is just a retexture of the adult Link model from Ocarina of Time, but it's a very good retexture, I'll tell you what. Besides, we also get this massive sword! This is an awesome weapon. I don't even know how you come up with this. It's this absolutely beautiful design of twisting twin blades that puts every other Buster sword to shame, man. I do love my big slab of metal on a stick, but compared to the ultra mega death spiral of Annihilation, it doesn't even come close. It was interesting getting the curve of the sword right, because the tip of the blade has far more metal behind it than the middle, giving it that taper used for cutting. I love how they made the two blades separate colours as well to differentiate them, especially in choosing a cool, calmer colour like turquoise in contrast with its deadly nature. It makes it feel more like a cerebral weapon, one of elegance rather than mindless slaughter, like say Guts' greatsword, as much as I love it. It's my main in Elden Ring after all. The last touch to the painting is giving him this super bright backlight to offset the darker tones. I think this really elevates the painting. It gives him this ethereal glow like he's guarding the gates of heaven, with all the power of the Almighty behind him, guiding his every action as he gazes into the abyss. That, and it makes him look really cool. This is probably the most distinct lighting choice I've made so far in the series, and it's that fact that makes this one pop even more. I try to be more restrained when it comes to the regular pieces to help them all fit in besides one another, but for this guy, I'm pulling out all the stops. Finally, it's painting the background of the inside of the moon with the lone tree. Of course, I chose to bring the highlights way down and obscured most of the scene in darkness, allowing the tree and the hillside to be silhouetted against the sky like it's the early morning. Honestly, of all the amazing vistas in this game, this had to be the background. It's such an evocative scene that encapsulates the uncanny and yet beautiful creativity of this amazing game. And with that, the final painting is complete. Brace yourselves. This might be my favourite painting in the entire series. It perfectly represents everything I love about this character, and it was well worth the wait to finally get the opportunity. I hope this lives up to the frankly staggering legacy this design has fostered. I know this is a fan favourite from many people, just like how Majora's Mask as a whole is a fan favourite Zelda game. For good reason. The amount of creativity and passion and craft in this game is frankly astounding. It's a miracle that we got it in the first place, and I'm so glad that we did, despite all odds. But, what do you think? Have I managed to pay suitable tribute to one of the best games of all time? Which of these paintings was your favourite? Which is your least favourite? Comment down below and make sure to hit that goddamn like button. And if you're enjoying the series so far, why not let the subscribe button know? Go on, give it a tap. There you go, don't be shy. Check out my Instagram and my bluesky to keep up to date with the series, and while you're here, why not check out my Patreon? I've got a brand new video of my totally legit Super Mario 64 speedrun going up there soon, as well as a sneak peek of a new series that's coming soon. All I'll say is, comic fans, you're in for a treat. That's all I've got for this episode. Tune in next time when we tackle two of the lesser known Zelda games, Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons, for the Game Boy Color. I hope to see you next time, folks. Take care, and have a good life.